Oh, and here we go for this morning. It's chilly, to say the least. I was reading online that it's according to this chap online anyway, it's been the warmest March, I don't know, since records began, or for 50 years or some other such thing. Well, all I can say is not where I am. It's been freezing. It's been a pretty unpleasant March, and now into April it's still cold. It's still relatively cold, I think. In the daytime it's getting better, but we've had like 0, 0, -2, that sort of temperature overnight. It's been pretty damn nippy. And trying to start the veg this year has been a challenge. Anyway, enough of a moan about that. Yeah, I was going to address what I regard as one of the sort of sacred cows that have come into being in the last few years. Sort of ideas that nobody challenges, everyone accepts without really being very critical about it, that these things are true. And what I refer to is diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI. Something of a sacred cow, those who believe in these things. I don't think it's any coincidence that those three letters, DEI, spell out the name of God in Latin. They didn't choose diversity, inclusion, equity. It was spelt die, wouldn't it? And that probably wasn't part of the agenda. Whereas sometimes when you look at the effects, you wonder if it is part of the agenda. We'll start with diversity this week, I think. Hello there, good morning to you. The idea seems to be that, the assumption, presupposition, if you will, is that diversity is a good thing in and of itself, and it's a better thing than an homogenous society. A group of people, like-minded people getting together to do something, or living in society together, or whatever. The assumption is made, and it's often made uncritically. It's made as if it was self-evidently the case that diversity is automatically better than homogeneity. But I struggle to see how that is the case. I look at, for instance, in the city schools, and these have become vastly diverse. Even places where I live in the middle of the countryside, even here it's changed quite a lot. But in, say, London or Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, all the main cities of my country, you see hugely diverse classrooms, and different children, and sometimes teachers too, bringing with them different preferred languages, sometimes the inability to speak English. They don't even share English. Different cultural expectations, different belief systems, different philosophies and way of looking at life. And the idea that this will improve communication or understanding, I think, is a little dubious, spurious, to say the least. A lot of these inner city schools, they're struggling and often failing to overcome such the basic difficulty of just simply talking to each other and teaching. When you have to teach a class of, say, 30 children, and you have 10 different languages represented, it is difficult for the teachers and the children involved. How that is supposed to improve education is a little beyond me. I mean, this sort of thing is greatly stressed now when looking for jobs, and particularly in corporations and in the civil service and places like that. The active promotion and sometimes the active manipulation of selection criteria in order to favour diversity, like diversity for its own sake. I don't think I'd have such a problem if the diversity was based on merits, if the people chosen to do the job were the best job. I don't really have a problem with someone's colour or their background or anything like that, as long as they can do the job that you hire them for, and that they are, of the candidates, the best available to do the job. But unfortunately, diversity has come to mean selecting people just on the bounds of, on the grounds of things like their skin colour, their religion, their origin, sexual preferences, for heaven's sake, and other such things. It becomes just a recipe for confusion, massive confusion. And I would say that's the sort of general state of affairs in many areas now. It's, think of an example. Sometimes I mean, bless these people because they are doing, trying to do a good job and all that. But sometimes when I go to the local surgery to see a doctor, the doctor will be, English will not be their native language, and they will be trying hard, but sometimes it is difficult to understand. The language barrier becomes, a great barrier in communicating directly with the person you're speaking to, and this leads to misunderstandings or like difficult interviews, not because they're not a nice person, you're not a nice person, but just simply because you can't understand each other clearly enough to make any sensible progress. There's numerous other sort of situations like that. The assumption that a diverse society is somehow automatically a happier society. I would contest this greatly. Having lived long enough now, I'm approaching the age of 69 now, scarily old. The idea that somehow modern times, because of the way the demographics of the country, things like that, the way we're made up, we're more diverse, that has actually improved the general standard of living in the sense of people living happily within their culture. There isn't even really a culture here now. There is a collection of cultures, but there is no British culture anymore. It doesn't exist. Well, to be fair, maybe in one or two isolated places, but increasingly shrinking as time goes by. There's not really a British culture left, depressingly. But the idea that this somehow improved things, I suppose you could, morning, I suppose you could make the argument that the food has improved, and I would agree with that one. The choice of restaurants is much wider, the quality of the food seems, in restaurants anyway, seems higher to me. We Brits are notoriously bad, have a terrible reputation for our food, and it's well deserved. It is pretty awful for the most part. So that's one area I think could be said to improve, but you look at other areas, the standard of literature, art in general, standard of theatre, or what we're presented with on television now as the programming. It's all gone down to a pretty base and unpleasant level. We're not moving forward as a society in any positive way. We're going backwards. That's one of the problems with equality as well, but I don't want to go into that this week. I may go there next week. But yeah, diversity for diversity's sake is not really working. I was trying to put a counter argument to this as I was thinking about it, and thinking, well, are there situations where diversity would be an advantage? And yeah, the answer is yes, there are some. Say you were in a company that was trying to sell products to a wide range of people, a wide range of countries, for instance, and cultures. Yeah, then it would make a lot of sense to have people on that advisory team who have some knowledge, some experience, or even are from that culture. So you can see some context where it would help, one or two. But I think for the most part, a team that is relatively homogenous, I would say is likely to beat a diverse team in almost every area. Almost, not every, but almost every area. The vast majority, let's say. So this idea is sold to us as if it was unquestionable, and it's distinctly not. We are distinctly in a place where we have these belief systems foisted upon us, almost as part of or maybe as part of an organised program. We're told again and again how wonderful diversity is, and it usually comes along with the equity and inclusion. And anybody criticising, anybody saying, hold up, hang about a minute, this doesn't necessarily work very well, is usually addressed with the usual sort of pejorative terms. I don't know. Sometimes it's just some sort of, it's supposed to be some sort of phobe or something like that. But it gets more extreme and more personal, Nazi, fascist, far right. When simply a lot of the time you're just saying, hang about, this doesn't work, because what you're telling me is a good way forward. It's not a good way forward. It simply doesn't work very well. I suppose that leads on to why are we having this approach? Why is this presupposition being forced upon us again and again and again? Everywhere you look, there's people, companies and television programs and theatre shows and everything else trying to reinforce diversity, pushing diversity everywhere, when in fact it's not a very good way forward. It doesn't really work very well. It doesn't work as advertised, certainly. It'd be interesting to see the studies on this, but I think that the setting up of the studies is probably quite challenging, how to actually do it, how you set the parameters. So I think what you got left with is an area that's hugely open for debate, but which is never debated. Which you don't get people on question time or anything like that, any of these other like social political programs who actually debate this. It's just assumed that it's correct, that we want diversity. That diversity will be a good thing. So I suppose in the circumstances, one of the best tests is just to look at the effects of following diversity programs, how it affects academia, the media, schools, society in general. And you can't say that it's looking particularly good on that evidence. We seem to have a more confused society, lower standard of academia, sometimes amazingly low. I remember when I was, I didn't go to university, I had the chance later in life to study, I think it was cognitive studies it was called. I was interested in psychology, and around about the age of 40 I was offered several chances to go to university, but because I was working at the time, it was going to be quite expensive to be able to do that. I turned them down, and went on my merry way. But I never went to uni when I was younger. But back in those days, it was mostly based on merit. Could you actually do? Were you capable of keeping up with the course and benefiting from the course? Now, with the watchword of diversity, it doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter to some extent. You've got to have some abilities, but you don't necessarily need the abilities required, and hence a lot of people fail on those courses, or they change the parameters to such an extent that success is fairly meaningless anyway. There is no kind of measure, objective measure of success, or they make you get sociological areas, some psychological areas. Objective measures are not really there at all, and to pass the course, essentially what you need to do is basically agree with what you've been taught and parrot it back. And even then, the standards of actual literacy have gone down hugely. Even then, it's difficult for people who have been included just on grounds of diversity to achieve the standard required. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all well. And we're left with this society where standards are pretty low in more and more areas. The people coming out of colleges and uni are ill qualified to be of much use in the world in general. I mean, it doesn't go for STEM subjects and things like that, but in many subject areas now, it's not actually much of a feather in their cap if they've got a degree, because people look at what the degree is in and they think, what is the use of that? It's become devalued to the point of absurdity, to the point of being meaningless. When I was a young man, a person with a degree was somebody to be looked up to and admired, to have gone through that much academic rigour and come out the far end with degree in hand was considered something entirely admirable. Now you think, oh hum, just another kid who's been pushed through the university system and given a degree at the end of it. It doesn't really have much significance now. I think a lot of employers feel that way, but a lot of employers, because of legal changes and other ways of sort of leaning on companies and employers in general, have to meet things like quotas and whatever, and find that they're hiring people not necessarily because they can actually do the job that's required, but because they fulfill the quota that's required. It's not a good thing, basically. It's a bit of a silly way to push society. It hasn't worked. It's been a failure. It's been more and more stressed over the past few decades, and the more we stressed it, the more of a failure it's become, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. You need to think about these issues yourself and kind of examine what's actually happened. Do your own research, as they say. When I was writing the essay, what I generally do is write an essay in a pub. I normally sit and have endless coffees. I'm more or less teetotal these days, so I'm just having coffee after coffee and writing and thinking and researching. It was a pub in a town in Norfolk, and it's hello there, my dog running after me here. Yes, this area has a particularly wide range of peoples. Most of them are fine. It's not problematic. Most people are European background, but not without some exceptions. And you do have this effect when you're sitting around in the pub. Hello, good morning to you.
Hello.
Hello again. Yeah, you do get this effect where you listen to other conversations and the realisation that most of the conversations are in languages that you do not understand. And although, because a lot of people do work here, they do make valued attempts to speak English, and some are very good, much better than my equivalent, to be fair. But it is a barrier to mixing. So what you find is you have a kind of cliquification of the of people there. Hello, you. Okay, I'll see you, boy.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's quite okay. Yeah, you have a kind of effect where people will tend to separate into cliques and stick to their cliques, which is kind of perfectly natural. It's what people do. To sort of cross that barrier takes a lot of work, and most people, most of the time, whether they be English, Latvian, Russian, Bulgarian, Polish, Lithuanian, whatever the group is, it's a struggle. So you're having to sort of overcome language barriers, and you're having to overcome cultural assumptions that your particular culture holds. So what happens is, although people, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, are respectful and decent about it from all sides, which is nice, there isn't really that much of an attempt to reach across and try to sort of like befriend people from other groups. As I say, it's all perfectly natural to be that way, but the idea that diversity is somehow going to improve matters in even like basic social situations is a bit of a myth, really. I don't really hold with that. The other thing that happens, of course, is you have a huge dilution of the local culture. To be British in this particular place I live, still the majority, probably the vast majority, probably 70-80% British, but there is enough influence from other cultures, and there are pleasant enough cultures. I don't want to have a go at people just for where they were born or anything like that. Perfectly civilised, decent people. Most of these people. Much the same about the British themselves. Most people are pretty sane and civilised, but some are not. But it does dilute the culture. It does make it kind of difficult for the culture that actually exists here, the sort of native culture, to exist in its own way, in its own unique form. It's constantly being challenged and watered down to the point where, if I'm honest, I don't actually believe there is much of a British culture left. I think I covered this earlier in this talk. There's not that much of it left. I suppose the question then becomes how much of this is purely accidental and how much is actually a policy. We know that DEI is more or less unchallengeable. I don't like people challenging it, and you are called all sorts of things if you dare to put your head above the parapet and mention the simple fact that diversity is something of a recipe for disaster and confusion in many situations, in many environments. But so we still have the situations where it's still pushed relentlessly. Now, why is that? That's here's the question that is not asked enough. It's going back to previous talks, that there is this quite deliberate attempt. It's not just in the UK either, across Europe generally, to dilute and change underlying cultures. So I think the idea is for people to kind of identify as some sort of pan-European or maybe just world citizen in the end. As we've got massive immigration coming from countries outside of Europe whose cultures are vastly different, who share nothing really, in the way of assumptions or understanding of the world. But it's being pushed relentlessly and pushing us to a place that's not an improvement. The standard of living in the sense of just the ease of life and how pleasant life is has distinctly gone backwards under these kind of measures, and it needs to be addressed. And I think on that note, stay for a little bit. On that note, I think I'll end the chat today and get back to work on the essay. Usual thing, comment and subscribe if you so desire, and hopefully we might go on to equity next week. That's an interesting one. It's another one where the assumption seems completely unfounded, let's say. But enough of that for now, and enjoy your week. Hopefully see you next time out. Bye bye for now.